Hey everybody, welcome to the Microservices meetup. Tonight is September 22, 2022. That's a lot of twos in that. That's great. Let's see. Big thanks to Omni for hosting us. So if you all want to know more about Omni, let me know. I'd be happy to tell you. Thanks for the food as well. Our presenter tonight is Casey Allred, who've never sent me a blurb to introduce him, but worked with Casey for a couple of years now, and we all know each other, so we can skip going around the room for introductions. And Casey, why don't we just turn the time over to you?
Sounds good. I will share my screen. Oh, let's do this. So, I was asked to talk about idempotence, right? And I'm pretty sure most of us here at least have some understanding of it, thankfully. I was hoping to be able to assume that.
But for the folks on YouTube.
Yeah, well, we're getting into it. We will get into it, I promise. Whenever I look things up, like whenever I'm asked to talk, I like to go look up what the definitions are. And of course, you also have to look up to see if there are any comics about it to help you really understand the true nature of it. Because comics do like to dissect things. I found this one and I thought it was really funny. Also, that whole site has a whole bunch of funny comics on it, so you guys should go check it out. And if you don't understand why that's funny, hopefully by the end of this talk you will. So
that's the goal for the presentation.
Yeah, exactly.
Nice.
Here's another one that I found I thought was pretty decent. Also has a Decompoke is also a good size person. Some comics and whatnot. All right, so what is idempotence? I like that's the question we're asked. And I looked it up and it kept coming back with like math things, right? I'm like, it's computers involved math, but that's not what we care about, right? How does this really apply, right? And you think about it, like talks about, this one down here where you're like f of x is equal to f of x, right? Basically that denotes kind of the concept we're going for, where, doing it multiple times is as if you've just done it once, right? So, but let's kind of explore some of the definitions here. Here's an excerpt from Wikipedia, the source of all truth, as it dives into that. Says basically the same thing. And believe it or not, idempotence is a big deal in the web. So this is off of MDN, but it's also a part of the official HTTP, RFC, and everything of what it means to be idempotent for HTTP. And the short answer is that if you do the same request, it's the same effect to the users that are using that see it, right? So basically everything but post should be idempotent. So it's very important that we kind of understand this concept and apply it. And so I just put it in layman terms here for me, because I'm a simple person. I have to see things simply. And from my perspective, my understanding, it is basically whether you do it one time or a whole bunch of times, the end result from what like your users see of your application and whatnot is the same. Meaning we're not going to store any extra state or change things or anything like that. We might log the requests or things like that, but that's a separate thing. That's ops. We don't care about them. From the actual like app's perspective, it should appear to be just the same. No extra state changes when you do it again and again and again.
Your domain state wouldn't change.
Right. So let's Why do we care about that? Like, what's the big deal? Well, when we're dealing with like eventide or microservices or anything really, when you're distributed, there's no guarantees on how often something will be delivered or how often you'll see something. Like it could fail delivery, it could fail and try again, all sorts of stuff. And that's what I say, it doesn't matter what that medium is, right? It could be Kafka events, or it could be HTTP requests or anything, right? And so we have to be mindful of that. We have to be defensive against it, or else we will end up with incorrect state in our applications.
Can I interrupt you again?
Yeah, but I was going to preface this by saying that if anyone has comments, outbursts, questions, please interrupt, because I find that to be better than me just rambling on. So, okay.
To what you said, like when we're doing autonomous components, the need for idempotence is very obvious because every time you restart the component, it will start reprocessing things if the handlers aren't idempotent. But as you touched on, like it's anywhere you have a network hop, because networks fail. That's the first fallacy of distributed computing, is that the network is reliable. And it's number one for a reason. So even in HTTP calls, like you were showing, this HTTP spec calls things out as like certain of the verbs are intended to be idempotent. And there are some examples of APIs that do that well. Although Stripe, they call their idempotency key. That's one of my pet peeves, is calling it idempotency. But if you've ever done a Stripe integration, they're the payment provider that made charging a credit card not horribly painful, I want to rip my teeth out kind of a thing. When you send them a charge request, you generate an idempotency key and put it in the request. And so if you call them and get an error response, you don't know if they've charged or not, you can just call them again for the same charge with the same idempotency key. And then they handle it on their side to make sure they're not double charging your customers. So props to them, especially in financial stuff. You don't really see it, but like if you've ever posted a comment on a page and then two of them appear, my guess is their handler is not idempotent.
Right. Yeah, and that's part of what I said there, like the Stripe example was what I was thinking when I said you don't want to get double charged for the same thing, right? How many of us have seen that or had a call up service like, look, you charged me twice, you know? We're trying to avoid those kinds of things for sure, because that's a bad experience for our users. So, thanks for that. So, already kind of talked about it, but what about eventide? That's kind of what we were talking about, the technology. Why do we care? Well, we need to make sure that in the case of like, you know, a command getting sent twice, it doesn't get processed twice if it matters, right? Like, which it probably does, right? So if it's the same exact command getting sent twice, we don't want to run it twice. We just want to make sure it's just once. Also, as you pointed out, things happen where we restart our component or it restarts itself. And when we replay those messages, we don't want to process them again, right? So how do we do that? Well, I'm going to introduce my awesome diagramming skills by showing you the problem, and then we'll dive into how we can solve it, right? So we're using the account component because it's something that's really available for people to expose or to play with and stuff like that. So we're going to pretend like the account's already open and we got this withdraw command, right? Withdraw ID ABC, right? And so we're like, yep, I got it. It's withdrawn. We're good. Oh, we got it again. Same ID, ABC. So this is not a different withdrawal. Oh no, we wrote another message, right? So that's what we're trying to avoid, right? We're trying to make sure that if that comes in, we don't get that extra message. So, I mean, how do we do this? How do we actually make something idempotent? Well, in the case of withdrawal, right, it's, or withdrawn or whatever, it's, if we were to record every single ID, that could get really expensive, right? Because accounts can live for a very long time, at least, you know, hopefully, right? You know, get your bank account closed on you. And there could be lots of them in there, and every time someone does a transaction, you don't want to have to load everybody's transactions. That would be a lot of memory. So we can't really store that. That would be kind of a domain check or applicative check. So in the absence of that, we look for something that's more mechanical in how messaging happens. And so in Eventide, and because of the way it's set up with MessageDB and stuff, we can use what's called the reservation pattern to dedupe some of these things. So let's see what that looks like. So like before, we have our withdraw command come in with ABC, and instead of just processing or whatever, we write it to a new stream that has both the account ID and the withdrawal ID on it. And we use what's called a write initial. It's just an alias to help us, where we basically saying, when we write this, we expect there to be nothing there, right? And then we just ignore any exceptions that get raised if there is something there. So when the second one comes in, we do that same write initial and nothing else gets written, right? So we're good. We've ignored that deduplication. Now we just go on to handle this withdrawn message with the new stream to actually write our message. And ta-da, we only processed it once. So, but wait, there's more. What about some of the simpler commands, right? Because that's a lot of machinery and extra work, right? Is there a way to do things simpler? And turns out something that we can reach to before that would be just something in our domain, right? Off of the entity that we have. So if a command is only supposed to happen once, right? Like you only open your account once, then we can just record if that's happened or not, preferably with some type of time of when it happened, and use that to indicate whether or not we should write another message. So let's see what that looks like. Oh. All right, so let's say we have these two open, and notice they're different global IDs and everything. First one gets processed. So we first check, and I put a little snippet of code down there so you can see, right? We're saying if the account is open, then we ignore it. But so we first check, and we only write it when it's not open. And jolly with it, it's not. So we write our open command, our message, right, saying that we did it. And then when we check it again, we see, oh yeah, it's already been opened, right? The entity sees that we've already opened, and we no longer write it. So ta-da, open itself is idempotent. But wait, there's more. As we've already alluded to, first of all, is there any questions about deduping the commands or the reservation stuff? You guys here in the room, I happen to know, are actually quite experts on it. So you probably could teach me about it. But any questions or stuff before we continue? No, I already put you guys to sleep. Perfect. Okay. So let's explore about message replay, right? That's another problem that we indicated we need that happens. So we have our reservation pattern that's already happening. And we've already covered those top two commands, make sure that those are covered. So if we replayed them, we would still end up with just the one command there, nothing more. We're good. We come back down here to handle this though. And oh no, we wrote another message because we weren't checking. Oh, bummer. So, I mean, again, we could record every withdrawal or anything on the entity and check it, but that's a lot of overhead. So let's look towards a more mechanical solution. Sequential idempotence. Woo. So what we do is, if you'll notice that the global ID of our command there, 3, is the same no matter what. Like once that command's written, it keeps that global ID. And that's part of the mechanics of messaging. So we can store that against, oh, we just kept the, all right, whatever. So we can store that in our message, right? We can say, I came from global ID number 3. And we store that as like a sequence on our entity. And then we can just ask, has this been processed yet? Is the sequence message on the command greater than or equal or less than the sequence that I've already processed? And if so, then we can know we processed it and we can move on. So hopefully that makes sense. And the reason why it wouldn't work previously is that these global IDs are actually 2 different IDs. And so trying to use that on those ones up above would just, they'd still get processed. And when we ask, we can know that we've already processed it, and ta-da, it's idempotent. But wait, there's more. What about replaying just like a simple command? Well, honestly, if you look at it, account open already does that for us. Because when we replay it, the entity will have the data and it'll ask it, hey, are you already open? And it knows I'm already open. It doesn't even try and do anything, right? So pretty simple stuff. So that's it. Those are some of the simple command like ways that we handle idempotence with eventide and why it's important. First, if we can find some type of like domain solution, that usually ends up being simpler, or if there is a problem, it'll have domain knowledge with it that helps us track down and understand where it went wrong. But in the absence of those types of solutions, we have to turn to something more mechanical on how the messages happen. So we fall back to those. So that's it. That's my brief little talk there. I know it's not super long or amazing, but yeah, any questions or thoughts or discussions about it?
No.
Stunned you all into silence, I did.
Who all do we have online now?
I don't even know. I see Guru. Welcome. Not sure how long you've been there, or if you have any questions or thoughts to add to it. But yeah, that's really all I had. The concept of idempotence is one of those things that once you start to really understand it and why it's important, it seems pretty simple and straightforward. But then there's times when you run into situations where it's like there's like little nuances and things like that where you're like, well, when do I have or how do I do my idempotence check to make sure that things properly flow correctly and things like that. So I stunned them all into silence. You did. Just so amazed by the presentation.
So close.
What if you use a timestamp for idempotence?
I mean, that's kind of what we were talking about with the open, right? Right here, right? Where this open, because it's a simple, has it happened or not, we use that timestamp if it's there or not to indicate whether or not it's open.
Yeah, but you're not comparing that against another timestamp later, you're just checking if it's there.
Correct.
Timestamp on the message, you mean?
Yeah, and actually in something we're doing right now, we are using a timestamp for idempotence, but you have to make sure that the source of that timestamp is always consistent.
In a sense, the positional idempotence is more or less the same thing as a timestamp check, because necessarily a message with a greater global position coming from the same message store was written later. So it's just a less precise timestamp, if you will.
Maybe. I mean, it depends on when because you're working over the network, right? Depends on when the message actually got received.
True. Yeah.
It could be that the two messages have like a different effective time,
Mhm.
but reached the message store at different points.
They could. Which plays to Casey's comment that the timestamps you're comparing have to have a consistency between them. That they are, the comparison is meaningful.
Yeah, we're doing something with DocuSign and we use their timestamp for something similar to an idempotence check. And the only reason why we can do that, we've done quite a bit of testing to make sure that specifically the one we're using is consistent and it's not just like when we processed or when they thought about it, but it is when the event that they're describing actually happened. So that is definitely something to be careful for, especially when it comes to times. Times and time zones. He's gave me a headache.
Did he stun you into silence?
Yeah, that's pretty much what happened. So, it is a good question though. It's something to think about.
Folks online, do you have any questions or comments?
I don't know if I've ever experienced that yet. I've heard people talk about Zoom bombed, but
Yeah, these guys.
It's the first, yeah.
that's the first time I've been legitimately Zoom bombed. Yeah.
Well, lessons learned.
Yeah.
But if there's nothing else for idempotence, we're good, I guess, right?
Yeah, does anyone, like you guys have worked with this a lot, but like particularly with the reservation pattern, is there any interest in looking at the account components code to see how it's implemented?
Oh, whoops, I clicked the wrong button. I actually had just to check. I actually had
What was that?
Is Guru from Omni?
Is what?
No,
Oh, no,
just trying to turn it up.
hey Guru, do you want to introduce yourself? We normally do introductions at the beginning, but I think you joined a little late. But yeah, this will give you the chance to say hello.
Yeah, sure. Hello, everyone. I'm Guru Charan. I'm currently a student at Long Beach, California State University, Long Beach. So actually, I worked with Ethan earlier at Barcadia. So I found the invite for this meeting on LinkedIn. So I just joined through that. Maybe I'll keep joining back.
Okay. Yeah, we'll have better company online next time, hopefully. Did you say we worked together before?
Yes, Ethan. I worked at Barcadia.
Arcadia, okay, yeah. Right on.
Yeah. So right now I'm studying at Long Beach State University.
Okay. Were you in the Hyderabad office or were you
Yes.
in Hyderabad? Okay.
Yes, I was in Hyderabad. So right now I'm in States.
Okay. Cool.
Oh, welcome.
Yeah. Sorry, so the question that like, would it benefit anybody to go through the code of how the reservation pattern is implemented? That's like, when I did the eventide training with Scott back in 2019, he said that the reservation pattern is the most complicated mechanical thing that you'll do with building components. And then even he refers back to his notes when he needs to do an implementation of it. So do you want to see that in more detail, or do you feel good because the three of you have been working in this stuff?
Review never hurts.
Okay.
To say it would benefit me is a massive understatement.
So, I didn't have this open because I thought maybe if there was time, we could just explore it. So like this is where I took those snippets from, right? The handle open here is like our simple domain or applicative check there. You can just see that if the time has been projected onto the entity, then it knows it's been opened. it's good to go. For the reservation pattern, we can see that in this main handler right here, oops, all it does is defer to another stream, right? But it does this right initial, and then it basically catches any expected version errors.
And ignores them.
Yeah, just don't worry about this. Nothing to see here. And then there's another handler inside of commands transactions here. And this is where the actual meat happens, where it says, hey, have I already been processed, right? And does that idempotence check, and then actually processes things. So, in my thing, I had a link to a couple spots. Where did I put it? But anyway, you can go to github.com eventide examples, and it will.
You already went through all those slides.
They're very quick. They're not like much time on each one. I knew this would probably go fairly quick. But
Do you want to review?
do you want to look
Process the whole thing.
You missed all the slides.
So Casey, why should my
After we
code,
here's a comment for you, see if you understand it.
why should I have to change my code to deal with this? Why is MessageDB so bad that it's not for me?
Oh gosh. I don't even know where to begin with that one. I guess the short of it is that there really is no guarantees that MessageDB could do to protect you, right? Like, and have it actually be valid, right? Like they could pretend and say, you know, within a certain time frame or whatever, but at the end of the day, there's a network in between your component and the database.
A lot of the times the idempotence comes from some logic that matters to you, not to the storage system, right? Like
Right.
something in the message that lets you know, oh, I've done this before, I haven't.
Right, and like historically, people did try and write what they called smart pipes, right? That would have almost like the whole parts of the application in the pipe itself. And that, I was not involved with that, but everyone who has been, that tells of the war stories, indicates that led to a lot of pain and suffering and trying to debug things and others that where it just did not work out very well. So that's why with microservices and other things, we've tried to move to dumb pipes and smart endpoints where the pipe just sends whatever, whenever, with whatever guarantees it has, but it doesn't care about the application logic or anything like that. And because it doesn't really care, you have to on in your smart application or your smart endpoint.
Messaging technologies like Kafka, at a first glance, it looks like you don't have to have smart endpoints because it doesn't send you the same messages twice when you restart. But the way Kafka works is you pull a bunch of messages from Kafka, and then as you process each one, the Kafka client sends an acknowledgement back to the Kafka server that records it and puts it in wherever it stores the positions. But your acknowledgement message is a message the same as the ones that you're consuming, and that message can get lost over the wire. And so Kafka may not get your record that you've consumed it. And so when you start up again, it'll resend the messages it didn't get acknowledgements for. And I've seen that play out in production scenarios like, wow, why is all of our work duplicated? And ask the question, and they did some debugging. It's like, oh, sure enough, yeah, you can absolutely get duplicates with Kafka. Kafka put out a thing how with, I think it's K-streams, they've achieved exactly once, but it's like in the super awesome thumbnail that I made for this meetup. You can get exactly once semantics. And to do it the way the Kafka did it, you're bound to their Java client, which is not good or bad, it just is. But you can achieve it. But even in that scenario, it's not the Kafka server that's providing exactly what semantics. Your client is where the K-stream abstraction is running. And so it's always the client that needs to deal with the possible repetition if you want to be guaranteed to not do duplicate processing.
Indeed. I just rely on the painful lessons learned by my ancestors to hopefully not have to deal with it.
I was alive and a working age in those days, as evidenced by the YouTube videos that I get from Vishal. But same, I just heard the stories. One thing where Idempotence gets really interesting though is how, and this may be a topic for another meetup, but like how do you remain idempotent when part of your handler does something that can't possibly be atomic with your message store? So like sending an email or making an API call to something else. Suppose you had a component doing a Stripe integration. You just use their idempotency key because they have it. But suppose there were some other API, you didn't know if they were idempotent. How would you handle a scenario like that?
Right.
These are important questions, and there are strategies that we could talk about, but we would just verbally talk about them and we wouldn't have any visuals, and I think they would help.
And I think sometimes those, the typical "it depends" answer comes out, right? Like, what really is the nature of what's available to you, and in that API or whatever, in order to really know what might be the best course of action. Or, for example, like, what does that API actually do, right? Is it terrible if I double send an email? Or, is it terrible I double charge my customer, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's probably a bad thing, right?
Yeah.
But sending 2 emails, maybe forgivable, maybe, I don't know. Maybe people get mad.
Depends on how far apart.
Right, yeah, no, it could look bad, but like, that's where it's like, what matters to the business, what versus what's capable, really come into effect of how far you really want to push the idempotence and such.
Same thing when you start doing aggregation, right? Do you need to be idempotent with your aggregation? Doesn't matter if you write to your external repository multiple times, or your view, whatever your view is being aggregated to.
True. Yeah.
It's another depends.
Mm-hmm.
So when I've seen things from software companies you would think would never show up, but like even just text messages. How often have we gotten a text message twice? Well, to me, that was probably an indication they had to restart something somewhere and they weren't idempotent because they sent the same message to me.
Mm-hmm.
Probably.
Yeah.
In this case, it's not like your bank account was affected by it,
Right.
but it's an annoyance to the user.
Mm-hmm.
Right. That's true. Anywho,
What is the potential problem if an aggregator is to do the same thing twice? Like, what's an example of that would be bad?
I don't know, it depends on, it's a depends, right? So like,
Depends on-
for example, if there's, I don't know, one thing that I consider is if there's a lot of data that it's trying to go through, the aggregator started, say, completely over from writing it all. Then you would end up with a race condition between something trying to read from it and the aggregator catching back up to where it was as it continues to write back to the database. So it could have written an old message back and changing the state back to an old state, and eventually it will be back to where it should be.
Oh,
But then somebody loads the page up and sees it in the wrong state at that exact moment.
it's true.
I see.
That's a potential. It depends on if it matters to you, right? Because it will be eventually consistent. So if the user refreshes the page later, it'll be back to the state it's supposed to be in. But
For example, if something was like possibly deleted, you could have it where like it goes to replay the messages and it adds it back in. And then it does some stuff and then deletes it. But in that interim, it's possible someone who pulled the data would get it. even though it was supposed to be deleted.
Like sensitive data, that's supposed to be erased from the
Right. As a user, that's super annoying to see your data presented one way and then like a few seconds later it refreshes to a different way.
Yeah.
Like that destroys my faith as a user.
But it depends on if that matters, right? If it's not like the UI is interacting with it and the view table is used by other external services and it's not a big deal if they see old data. I can't think of a specific situation off the top of my head, but there are circumstances where it might not matter if you have perfect, like idempotency with the aggregation, and it's okay to eventually catch up.
Yeah. Like, yeah, I can't think of anything too direct. Anyway, yeah.
Jerry just joined us. Hey, Jerry, sorry, we had to do the waiting room because we got Zoom bombed today by what sounded like some annoying teenager. Well, we know they were
It could be young
annoying.
college.
They sounded like teenagers.
Yeah.
What was that?
Almost like young college kids, like their voices were just deep enough.
I think they have used some recorded
One of them
audio.
was-
They
yeah.
didn't.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. We were actually just wrapping up, I think. So, but still good to see you. Hopefully, college kids didn't steal your likeness.
And as long as you understand this comic, then you're good.
We need to get some, I just recently started using the Airbnb app. And just this conversation is making some things make more sense. And their app has some serious problems with staying consistent. And I've deployed, sent a change, looked at it, not see it show up, went and sent it again, looked at it and saw it double, right? I don't know if that was just like delay, right, or if there's an idempotent.
That means that there's no idempotent.
That sounds
means
like
that
the
their
symptoms.
client should have
Yeah.
generated, oh, that's one thing I didn't bring up. That often the key for idempotency has to be generated by the client.
I would take that further, not often, must be.
Yeah, I was hedging a bet there, but in most, yeah. There may be some random scenario where it's somehow fine, but I can't think of any. But you're right.
I'm willing to say it, like, it has to be, has to come from the client.
Yeah, like, because the client is the one that knows, are you making 2 deposits or just 1, right? And so should I send, 2 $5 deposits, or did you really only deposit 1?
Yeah.
If
one
the key
$5.
came from the server, you can call the server and get a 500 and not get a key back.
True.
So did this come from, did the error happen before or after the work was done? And so what, like the tool you Google for is idempotence key for what you could use. With Stripe, it's anything that you want to send. So you typically generate some random nonsense. We use identifiers for things a lot in event-tied systems for that, but it's just any piece of data to uniquely identify the operation you're trying to perform. In the account stuff, it is the transaction ID, as it's called, the deposit ID on the deposit command and the withdrawal ID on the withdrawal command.
Right.
That word. I get tongue twisted on it.
My point, what I was gonna say is that if your Airbnb client had properly recognized, oh, I'm sending the same thing.
In this case, it was a picture, it was posting a picture to a listing and I posted it.
Yeah.
Same exact picture. If they have to begin with price change.
At the very least, they could have done a hash of the picture to know if it's a duplicate, but.
If you look at the meetup event for this particular session, you'll see the thumbnail in there twice. Yeah, it's totally meetup.com. Totally
I
not
marked,
user
I
error.
marked it, this was a money, it wasn't a money transaction, it was a price, I did a 10% discount and I didn't see it show up. And so 5 minutes later, I did it again, and I went back in and I was like,
Oh, really? So it was
That's
like
bad.
an additive. Oh,
That's bad.
yeah, so there's real consequences. Like, does that have you then thinking like, if there was some other platform, maybe I'd use that? Money things, like,
yeah.
you don't mess those up.
And I guess it's not a transaction, right? So maybe they didn't care as much, but.
No, they should still care.
Well, yeah, it's still financial issue. You're gonna hit someone in the pocketbook
Maybe it's
somewhere.
a feature, you can keep pushing it, man, 10 more
Pretty soon you're
Eventually, there's 100% off.
We'll pay you to come and stay.
After you hit it 100%, you just keep doing it, we'll pay you.
Yeah.
Yeah, their app is pretty, the admin side of their app is
Yeah, ideally, in a situation like that, they would have some indicator on the UI to say, we're processing a request you've already made. Right, so then you can make the decision, oh, I want to do another one, or I'm gonna wait and see if this thing goes through.
Yeah. That sucks.
Their website is super good though, it's just their app. I'm gonna have to run the experiment now to see if I can get the idempotence issue from their website.
Maybe it's
Let me
just faster
know.
on the website.
Let me know when you're doing that.
Yeah.
So that I can book.
So I know when to look.
Hit the button.
Pick a random date in like 2026 or something. Alright, I got you guys guess.
Still gotta be fast enough that someone doesn't book it.
Oh,
Out here, but it's your wife's birthday, you booked it.
By the way, you understood that joke, that meme?
Did I get it? Apparently. Can't pronounce it.
It's funny because he doesn't treat the word idempotently. He does it differently every time.
Oh. Oh.
Jokes are better when you have to explain them, right?
Yeah. All right.
He went
Well,
up to you from your invite.
what was that?
He went up to you on your invite, your meetup invite. Is it in your invite that you even like duplicated text twice? I remember.
Did I?
Obviously, it was intentional.
I think you did, yeah.
I'm gonna stop the recording so I don't have to fix this part in post-prod, but